Hey guys, I am Ibigandscary. I'm bringing you another StarCraft 2 replay. This time featuring in our top right hand side is StratoT from Team Furious Gaming. He is our diamond level Terran player. We're on Red City, and the bottom left from Clan Project, actually. It's CCS, but it stands for Project on BattleNet, so I don't know. Is Frostalgia. I'm going to go with Frost for this fella. He is also our diamond level Protoss player. Both players are in diamond. We are on red versus blue on Red City, so it's probably a ladder match. Most people veto out the Red City, but since we don't have a Zerg in this matchup, we don't really have to worry about anything being vetoed just yet. Lots of nice narrow chokes, lots of vertical landscape, which is actually going to come into play later on. The reason I'm excited about this video, and I'm kind of excited about this video, I'm not going to lie, is that Frost is going to show us a really cool example of what to do whenever you do cheese, or not cheese, an all-in. When you do an all-in, but it doesn't succeed in 100% killing your opponent. It just kind of equalizes everything, and then you're left in that awkward situation of like, what do I do? How do I transition out of that build? And so it's a really neat and great example. I watched it and I was going to cast it just like normal, but I was like, you know what, I can't. It is a very smooth transition, so I wanted to share it with you. I wanted to show you exactly what's happening. So Frost, I'm going to spoil it for you. He's going to be going for a blink all in. He's going to have the gateway down. He's going to double tap his assimilator. He's going to throw it on the core as soon as that gateway's done. Very normal, very obvious. But he's going to scout with his probe very, very early on. And you'll see that Parting does this on PvP. Who else used to do this? Oh, Sage used to do this against PvT. Beyond that, it's not the most popular build in the world, but it's very, very powerful, especially whenever you have that landscape that you can kind of abuse, specifically these cliffs over here. And the reason he's scouting so early with that probe is to see exactly what sort of aggression StratoT could be doing, because, you know, if he saw some signs like there was some shenanigans going on, proxy 2 racks or something like that, then obviously he'd need to switch up his build back into something a little less normal for him, a little away from that all-in, more defensive in nature. Double assimilators going down there. We have our cybernetics cores just starting up on that saturation, just has 2 workers in either one of those. He scouted the CC as it was going down, sees that there's no super tech, no super early gas or anything like that. Double racks back at home means that StratoT's going to be producing a lot of mineral heavy Marines. Hasn't tapped his own gas, so he doesn't need to worry about any high-tech sort of play. Obviously the scout has already gone down, and with that he comes back and produces a pylon up here on the high ground, and that's super, super clever, because not only is this a very obvious location, I mean obvious because the SCV is going to skirt right by it, not obvious because the SCV would have absolutely no reason to poke his head up here. I see Stargates proxied up here all the time, and by proxied I just mean hidden. And we're going to see the Twilight Council be thrown up there. He forgoes the first Zealot, throws down a Stalker instead, and stays on top of that assimilator core. He's got perfect saturation back at home, pretty much has that ideal 2 probes on each one of the mineral patches. I guess this guy is missing a person, but he's probably running around actually doing some building of his own. Checking to make sure that there's no proxy. After that first Stalker goes out, starts up a second one, but also the first 100 gas that he accumulates throws down that Twilight Council. He's also denying the scout with that first Stalker. He's killed the SCV, which is clutch, because if you allow him to survive, he's going to come in here, see absolutely nothing except for a lot of gas, and then he's going to poke down here. He saw the probe finish, that the probe was leaving, but he didn't have a full scout on the base, so he prioritized the scout of the base first, went around the base, and died from the Stalker. So he doesn't get to poke down here again and see that there's no nexus being created, which would really raise a lot of red flags for StratoT. And we can see that he is a little bit feeling defensive. He's throwing down double bunkers back at home. He still just has 2 of the barracks, but we're probably going to see a 3rd one come out sooner or later. He's double tapping the gas also, so he's going to have a lot of extra gas. Yeah, so he's going to want to get up to that normal 3 barracks timing, so he can get out that tech lab, start working on the upgrades, but also have maybe a reactor on the other one, so that he can actually start to produce the sheer volume of Marines that's going to, you know, allow him to survive for much longer. Frost is going to be proxying his first probe with his first net. Ooh, what's it called? Pylon. Thank you. First pylon right here. He's actually going to double them up, which is not 100% necessary, but it's always nice, just because, you know, if one is scouted or if your first push doesn't go as planned. Not necessarily right on top of each other, but now that those pylons can't be proxied right here and then allows you to warp up on the high ground, you know, there's no real reason to aggressively position them. Mothership core is done, so you move off with both of your Stalkers. It's goes without saying, but I should mention it, you're constantly chrono boosting the Twilight Council once it's finished so that you can start up on Blink. You only have 3 gateways because you're producing those incredibly expensive stalkers, and you're only on 1 base economy. And this is really the most delicate period right now, is because you're banking a lot of gas and a lot of minerals, and you're not spending it to the best of your abilities. I mean, you'd love to throw down a Nexus, you'd love to throw down an extra gateway or something like that, but you want to have the extra minerals back at home so that once the Twilight Council is done, you can switch back over and start to chrono boost out your warp gates. Maybe you can start to throw down a Nexus early on. But here comes the push from Frost. This was great. He comes in, he takes out the 2 supply depots rather than pushing into the SCVs, and you're like, why is that? It's probably because it's easier, and he also, most importantly, wants to stay really close to the ledge. As soon as his stalkers take any hull damage, he blinks them away, and that's, I mean, obviously it's proper blink micro, but it's impossible to do that whenever you're up on high ground because it's just an inevitable death sentence if you can't blink down to the low ground. Beautiful play there. It doesn't look the most successful thing in the world, but we have 9 workers killed already just from that little push. Remember, the first one went down from the scouting, but 8 workers, that's a lot, especially considering the fact that Terran's up on 2 bases. Another aggressive blink forward, this one designed to take out the Marines more than anything else. Now that the SCVs are right on top of them, remember these SCVs are the ones pulled from the natural mineral line as well as the one from the main. Mothership core goes down, which is disastrous. It's really, really terrible because that's going to make it so that Frost can't blink back in for a 3rd push. But guess what happened? 19 workers have been killed. It's absolutely brutal, and the stalkers get to just walk one of them up the ramp, gets to blink right up on top. All of a sudden, he's starved for pretty much everything. I mean, he's lost a heck of a lot of SCVs, and he's lost a lot of Marines, and with this final push, the total number of workers is going to climax at like 25, maybe 30. 23 workers killed, and that doesn't sound a lot until you realize it's 15 harvesters over 24. And this is what I'm talking about with Frost, is he can't push again. I mean, he does not have the economy to continually produce stalkers. He's probably run up against a bit of a wall. He can't continue to push against these Marines. The production is just too high. Stim is going to be finishing in a handful of seconds, so he packs up and he leaves. He realizes that he's done enough damage. He's still in this game by anybody's count, but remember, Terran is still on 2 bases. He can really mass produce those harvesters, up to 18 over 24 already, and he's got those mules being called down, so his mineral income is actually superior to Frost. So I would say that the game is really equalized, and so just hats off to Frost. This is the part that I was just like, that is so cool. Seamless transition. He had the Twilight Council out already, so he throws down the Templar Archive instead. He goes double forge because he's got all that extra gas saved up, already has the assimilators thrown down, and he's just waiting until that Nexus finishes. I would be producing probes right now. He's got the extra money, he's got the extra supply, there's really no reason not to, but he's continually churning out tech also, getting that charge out there, and I love how he incorporated in the all-in tech that he had, that Twilight Council, just immediately transitioned over to that Archon and Templar and Zealot composition that does so well against the Bioforce that he was seeing out of Strato. Strato, hats off to him too. He's playing this like a pro. His tech is kind of falling on the wayside. He's getting it back to where it should be because his saturation's back to where it should be. I mean, 28 over 24 harvesters. He's back up to that 2 base economy. Hasn't tapped that 3rd and 4th gas just yet. Also is not grabbing combat shield even though Stim is done. He's going to be pushing forward with these Marauders and Marines, but they're going to have a hard time against the Archon, which is being produced right now. And it's such an early Archon. It's going to do so much splash damage against these Marines that do not have combat shield, and they're going to weaken themselves with that Stim. This is so great. So here they come into the engagement, into the choke. That Archon is just going to be making mincemeat out of all of them. Charge finishes just a handful of seconds before, and we have plenty of those Blink Stalkers. This is such a small force, and if you saw the force from Strato moving in, you're like, wow, that's very intimidating, but it's because the upgrades are in such a wide favor of Frost. He's got Charge, he's got Blink, and he's got those Archons, and then what do these guys have? Just Stim. They don't have anything else. It was so stunted by that all, and it was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Still no combat shields. We do have the +1 coming out for Strato. I'm going to transition more into a bit of a back and forth just because the highlight of this video has passed is the fact that all in and that transition was just so banging. So banging. +1/+1 underway for Frost, and he's just transitioning over to a more normal sort of build. He's probably going to think about grabbing his own 3rd at this time. Yeah, there he goes with his probe. Just down to the bottom right hand side, and that's awesome because we also have these pylons checking out the third over here for Strato. Strato hasn't even started to produce his third CC just yet, and that's just showing you how much damage was done early on. We have Storm coming out, adding on a couple of more High Templars, just going to work on that Archon count. Obviously, the Zealots are really key in this matchup, but remember, Red City has a lot of narrow chokes, and those Archons do so much damage to anything that they can get right on top of and do their splash damage on. Zealots should be not used as heavily as Archons could be, if that makes sense. We have the third CC coming down. Both the Tech Labs remaining silent. That combat shield is so incredibly important. I just want to make sure I didn't miss it. No, we don't see it on the upgrades, and these Marines are just going to pay so very dearly because, like I said, splash damage is going to be so incredibly important in the coming battles, and the Archons as well as the Storm, they're you're going to pray for that extra hit points afforded by that combat shield, and it's finally started now. Strato is taking his third, so it doesn't look like he's going to be super aggressive. 1-1, and Sonic Storm is going to be finishing. We do have a drop coming down into the main, but the main was getting pretty mined out. Still a healthy chunk of the economy from Frost. He sees the 2 chrono boosts down on the forge, but they have stopped because +1 is totally done. Adding on just extra tech. The factory coming over just to see the terrible news that the third has already been taken by Protoss, and if you are Terran, you never ever want that to happen. You never want to be that far behind on the economy as well as the tech. Ghosts underway. Oh my goodness, this is it's a great build. Good decision by Strato. I mean, he's seen those High Templars. I don't believe there was a feedback on this. No, there was not. So he just noticed that the High Templar were there, or it could have been the giant glowing Archon. That always cues me in on the fact that there might be High Templar out on the field. So Ghost, an excellent decision. Really going to need that EMP so that he can kind of deal with the Sonic Storms that'll be coming out. I like the addition of extra Marauders. They're really going to chew apart the Stalkers, as well as slow down those Zealots as they try to get down on top of Strato's army. But Strato is significantly behind. He doesn't have an orbital here at the third just yet, and because of that, he needs to be more aggressive than he actually is. He's succeeded in keeping alive the majority of the stuff in his medevac, so he needs to be more aggressive with that. And here we go. He is going to be pushing down just to the north side once again, poking in here, and did great timing because it happened at the exact same time that Frost elected to retreat with his Stalkers. A quick blink forward allows him to get off more than a handful of pot shots, as well as warping in a handful of those Zealots. So really not doing much to equalize that workers kill tab. 23-3 still. Pretty brutal. Nexus is up at the third. We have 40 over 44 for the Harvesters. So yeah, right on top of each other, but more important, the upgrade advantage is still heavily in Frost's corner. His 2-2 is going to be finishing up well before +1 armor, as well as +2 range, melee or ground or whatever you want to call it, Terran infantry. And yeah, Frost knows that the advantage is in his corner, and more importantly, he knows that he's cleaned up a healthy chunk of the drop pressure. He did a lot of damage to that medevac. He'll be able to leave behind a handful of his Stalkers so they can actually clean that up, and at the same time pushing off down into the third. It looks like Strato is prepared for this, but remember, Storm is done, and you would just not expect Storm to be done so incredibly rapidly. He's got a handful of High Templars added into the mix too, all of them with just a lot of extra energy. This is going to do so much damage as long as those Storms are successful. We don't see our sentries added into this mix to make it so that the Terran Bio Ball is going to be held in place, and we also see some Ghosts, so bear in mind that Ghost could land a clutch EMP. The High Templar don't come into this force. It looks like the surround of the Zealots is just, beautiful Storm right on top of everything. We just see the gore left behind, but it looks like the majority of the Zealots have been cleaned up. The single Archon is probably not going to be enough to force this back, but another wonderful Storm just secures the third, allowing the Archon and the handful of Zealots left to focus down that orbital command. Last orbital melts away as the Ghosts and Marauders come back in for reinforcements. Everything here's got to retreat because they really don't have enough to hold back the impending tide of Marauders. The factory has not landed at that third. I keep seeing that on the medevac and thinking it's a drop, and that would be terrible. Also, speaking of drop, did I miss a drop? You see that the medevac is totally gone. Let's check out the workers kill tab. 4 workers, so maybe I did. A single probe went down in it, so it's not the end of the world. And we see that the Stalkers are no longer there, but the photon cannons, no, they didn't get a kill either. So yeah, I guess I don't know what happened to that medevac. Probably went home. Hopefully went home. Yeah, he did go home. Look at that. He got hurt. One of these guys, 63. I think I remember that. That was that medevac right there, in case you guys were wondering. We have +3 weapons as well as +3 armor started up, and I believe that Terran is still on just 2-1, right? Yeah, 2-1. And that just, it blows my mind how seamless that transition was. And I keep harping on it. I know I am. But I liked it, and it's a great example because that's the hardest thing in the world to do, is to transition from an all-in into a viable build and to realize that you've done enough damage to justify it, because it's so common for you to do like a tin pool and get out there if you're Zerglings and then kill maybe a handful of drones and be like, well, did I do enough damage? I don't know, and it requires a lot of game sense, and that's obviously what Frost has. I mean, he's up in Diamond. That's where that game sense starts to come. It's not so much about not having mechanics, not having to build order. It's about being able to sense what your opponent's doing and react accordingly to it. So hats off to Frost. It looks like this game is winding down. The third's going to be going down in a handful of seconds. Terran's not being very aggressive, being very, very defensive, and the just sheer volume of Zealots. And you can see how the Zealots are having a very hard time following Terran into this narrow choke, and Frost actually realizes that, elects to take down the rocks on the left side of the third so they can actually use the wider choke here, or maybe even the choke up to the north side. And that's what I'm saying about Red Cities. It's very, very narrow. Those Archons are far better of an investment than the Zealots, but the Zealots do absorb quite a lot of damage and allow the High Templar to get right on top of them. And look at all that extra energy. We see at least 2 storms added into either one of those High Templars, and that's just going to be so brutal. Even some Reapers being added to the mix. You know you're having a bad time when you're having to add Reapers. We see another tech switch coming out from Frost, the Colossus coming out, but in actuality, I don't foresee that is really going to be needed. I think that the next push is going to sack the natural. We don't see a lot of resupplying coming out from Frost. There goes a handful of High Templar coming out. Probably the majority of those going to become Archons just so that they can add in their AoE. I mean, High Templar are great, but you only need a handful of them to throw down those storms. After that, the general feeling is that Archons themselves would be a little bit more beneficial, a little bit easier to control, a little bit more cost-effective overall. Here comes the final push. We've got that charge lots with just a handful of Stalkers just for a little bit added mobility. Stalkers are actually in the front, making it so that those Zealots are going to have a hard time getting up to the front. There goes the time stop. And where are the storms? It looks like the initial pull back just sets up those Marines, and they just melt away, and we have plenty of Zealots left over. It looks like everything else is just going to be left up for a trickle sort of engagement. The Colossus does arrive on scene and is proving me totally wrong, because he's got that extended thermal lance and is going to be doing a lot of extra damage to those Marines. Frost, yeah, Strato actually holds. Good for him. Good for him. He's got his CC up also. I don't think he's going to be able to secure his third, because Frost is definitely not going to be laying off the aggression. His third's actually not fully saturated, which is probably why he's having a hard time constantly re-macroing. He's got a lot of extra gas, not a lot of extra minerals, and because of that, he is, having to resupply with Archons, which is not the worst thing in the world to resupply with, but I have a feeling that he's not 100% on top of what's going on back at home. I mean, his saturation back at home on the mineral line could be just a little bit better. Third has been secured by Strato, but when I say secured, I mean saturated, not so much held in any fashion, because if Frost wanted to push into there, this would get cleaned up in just a handful of seconds. I realized that I called this game like 6 minutes ago, and Strato is doing a fantastic job just holding on. Everything is getting melted away from those Archons, though, and this is just such a high-tech army against such a low-tech army. Fantastic EMPs right down on top of those Archons. Remember, that does so much extra damage to those shields. Regardless, the natural is going to get cleaned up, and it looks like the main is pretty much mined out. So once he becomes aware of this third, Frost is going to be able to force an engagement against Strato. The orbital command does come down. It looks like everything's pushing down to the low ground, but that's exactly what those Zealots were waiting for. Oh, a storm goes down right on top of those Zealots, not just barely nicking Strato's entire force. And now we have those Archons kind of barreling up that ramp, and that Colossus is just paying for its weight in gold. Really just shelling down a lot of extra damage. Here comes the SCVs, the cavalry getting just cleaned up. Oh, a second Colossus arriving on scene just to help out that initial one. We have 56 over 107 supplies, so yeah, Strato is definitely in dire straits right now. Dire straits. Look at that Congo line of Zealots just moving into the third. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about right there. Is a very difficult decision. of what happened. What do I do whenever my all-in doesn't succeed? It wasn't cheese. Straight up, no, it wasn't cheese. It was that actually is a four-letter word of love. I love you. It wasn't cheese. It was an all-in. It was very well executed. Whenever I say all in, I don't know what it means to you, but when I say an all in, it's something that you have to do damage with in order to stay in the game. And that's what Frost did. He did a lot of damage to those SCVs. It was like 23 workers killed or something like that, which is brutal. And he realized that he did enough damage that he could afford to retreat. He retreated with 5 or 6 stalkers in tow, rather than trying to force an engagement that was increasingly becoming one-sided because the defender's advantage was just a little bit too much, and transitioned seamlessly into that High Templar. The Templar Archive was a perfect choice because it used the infrastructure that he already had in place. Things I would change about it is to throw down that Nexus a little bit earlier, maybe the second time you push in. But like I said, it is an all-in build. You need every bit of minerals, so it's very difficult to find the right time to throw that down. And I do not play Protoss, so I don't know 100% when it is appropriate. But like I said, Sage and Parting, both I know do this build. Partings is a little bit more open-ended. He likes to transition depending on what he sees and what he reads, but he's a grandmaster, so he can do that. But if you're interested in improving it in any way, please, by all means, look them up. Thank you for looking me up, because if you guys have a replay, I'd love to cast it. You could PM me here or on Reddit. One way or another, I will see you guys later. I am Big and Scary.